Hello there, I'm Brian Jack, instructor of Bassoon at CSU, and today we'll be talking about some all-state audition material. Anytime you have an audition, you can always ask, why was this material selected for the audition? What will the committee learn about my playing, and why do they choose this piece? And in this case, we have two etudes. Etudes, the word literally means studies, and each etude is written with an educational purpose. So you can ask yourself, what is that purpose and what was the composer trying to get at? The composer is trying to get you to learn or develop some certain skill. And in this case, when we look at etude number 7, we can see it doesn't go particularly high in the range, and it doesn't go very low, and it doesn't go extremely fast or challenge your sense of dynamics or give you very sophisticated phrasing to work with. So what is the point? What are they looking for with this one? Well, I think the answer is all about your left thumb. This etude lives in a range that is very easy to crack. This part of the bassoon and this part are fingered the same way. The only thing that separates those two registers is your air. And so because of that, we can wind up hearing this ugly, growling, cracking sound. As I jumped up the octave, it cracked in the middle. If I try to re-articulate notes in that range real quickly, it's very easy for the lower register to want to speak, in which case, again, we get that growling sound. Right in that range, there's a lot of ugliness every time I articulated all of those notes. But if we use our left thumb keys, these basically act like octave keys. Sometimes this is referred to as flicking, which is sort of an outdated method of using these keys. And you can also refer to them as vent keys. So when I play the lower A, I'll be using the whisper key. And when I want to jump up the octave, I'll go up here to this key for A. And then I use this one for B, B flat, and C, and this one for D. So with these keys, I can articulate all these notes without worrying about cracking. The upper register is essentially forced to speak, and we don't have to worry about the lower register butting in. There's one other fingering that you should know for this piece, which will help things, and that's for the E in the upper register. Usually when we play this, we use 3 fingers on the right hand, but a lot of times in this piece, we have to slur up to that E or down from it, and so when we do that, it's easier to not use the first finger of the right hand. So at the beginning of the second line, that first bar ends with C up to E, and if I play it with all 3 fingers of the right hand, it likely will crack. To facilitate it, I will not use the first finger, and it'll be much easier to slur to that E. Likewise, later on in that same line, the penultimate bar ends with E down to C, and again, I'll not use the first finger of the right hand. One other interesting feature of this etude is a rare dynamic indication of RF. We don't see that very often. It means rinforzando, and essentially that means reinforced. So it's not really an accent. An accent would apply to one note, but reinforcing happens to a section. So to bring this out, the notes before the RF can taper away and be played in a light fashion, and then when we see the RF, open it up and keep it full until the diminuendo happens. That happens twice in this piece. One other item I'd like to point out for this piece is whenever you see an accidental, that's usually a good time to not take a breath. If you were to take a breath at the first accidental we see, which is a D sharp, it would really truncate the phrase. But instead, we can use that D sharp to push into the next bar. You might be inclined to sneak a breath in there, but do your best to not take a breath and to connect a longer phrase that way. Once you've got your left thumb keys down, this etude becomes pretty straightforward and it's fun to play. Strive to make this sound easy and even elegant. There's very little written in this etude regarding dynamics, so make sure that the few dynamics indicated in here do come across in your recording. At the very beginning of the etude, it says dolce, so you'll want to play with sweetness, and you could follow some basic phrasing ideas. As the phrase ascends, you can crescendo a little bit, and as it descends, decrescendo a little bit. But again, the most important thing is the RF and the hairpins that are indicated in the second half of the piece. Lastly, I'll just mention that repeated notes, in this case, are part of a phrase, so do your best so that they don't become completely static and the same throughout. It's easy for repeated notes, especially staccato repeated notes, to make a phrase choppy, but we want to avoid that and have beautiful, long, elegant phrasing. The second half of this audition is another etude. This one's listed as number 29, and again, you want to ask yourself, what's the point, the educational purpose of this particular etude? Well, in my opinion, this looks fairly overwhelming. There's a long string of 16th notes, and then the second line, the third line has got another long string of 16th notes, but the bigger issue is that there are a lot of notes in there that don't look very familiar. Being a bassoonist, you probably play in a band in school more often than an orchestra, so you're probably accustomed to key signatures with more flats than sharps. And in this case, we've got two sharps and then a whole lot of sharps thrown in as accidentals. We've got an A sharp and an E sharp and a B sharp and a G double sharp. It's not often that we come across notes like this. Anytime that you come across a piece where it looks a little overwhelming, a little bit of analysis can go a long way. Let's look at the very first bar, the opening bar. Right off the bat, we've got an E sharp and an A sharp, two notes that we don't see very often. Do your best to consider these notes E sharp and A sharp as opposed to F or B flat. If you pencil them in, ultimately you'll just be confusing yourself, and in the long run it's a lot easier to consider the notes E sharp and A sharp. But for right now, let's remove those notes. If you take those notes out of the equation, what do you see? It's just simply an ascending B minor chord. And by adding in the E sharp and the A sharp, the composer makes it more interesting and melodic than it would be by itself. But at the core of it, it's still just a chord. The third bar is a B minor scale, and the fourth bar is an F sharp chord with a little bit of inversion there. So once you start looking at it, it becomes simpler and easier to play. While we're talking about the first bar, one of the things that you'll definitely have to look out for is moving your fingers from E sharp, which includes none of your fingers, to F sharp, which includes all of them. The half hole with your first finger of the left hand is absolutely crucial here so that the note does not crack. You can count that this will be one of the things the committee will be listening for. Ooh, nobody wants to hear that. So spend a lot of time going from your open E sharp to your F sharp with all of your fingers, and pay particular attention to the half hole of your first finger of the left hand. Also, for this F sharp, a lot of students are taught F sharp by using the thumb key F sharp. Technically, for this F sharp, you should be using the pinky F sharp key. There is a difference on the instrument in terms of which pad is opened at that point. So when you play the lower register F sharp, that's the thumb key F sharp. And when you play this F sharp, you want to use your pinky, in which case you extend your pinky from its normal resting place on the F key down here to the F sharp key. If that feels super awkward and weird, or your pinky doesn't stretch that far yet, the thumb key will suffice, but it's just good to know that the correct fingering for this note is with your pinky. Now, moving on to the section with the 16th notes, again, a little bit of analysis can help clarify what exactly we're looking at here. So the first 3 16th notes initiate a pattern that we're going to see. Big beat 2 of this bar follows that pattern, but is just down a third. And then the next big beat follows it once more, starting on G. So you've got a note, and you go down a half step, and then back to that note. In between, there's a little scalar passage. But just by recognizing the fact that there's a pattern in there can clarify what we're dealing with and make practicing a lot more targeted and ultimately make this thing easier to play. So to practice it, you might want to truncate the whole thing and only play those 3 notes. And then when that becomes comfortable, add in a few more to connect them. Repeat that until that feels absolutely solid and comfortable. And repeat that, and so on. You notice when I repeat a small section, I like to include the first note of the next small section. That couples those tiny sections together, which will ultimately allow you to play a very smooth, longer section. If you look at the very last line, again, we have some notes that are very uncommon, like E sharp. And again, here's that G double sharp. Now, G double sharp will sound the same as an A, but again, it's best to think of it as a G double sharp as opposed to an A. This is another great section to practice in small pieces. Look for those kinds of patterns again, and the piece will become, again, easier to understand. If I start this 16th note run, it just goes down the scale. And now we've got something a little bit more interesting because there's a little jump and then there's an A sharp. That's something that's a little awkward. And so by practicing just that very specific spot, it'll become easier to understand and it'll flow more on your fingers. Now the next big beat is F sharp to E sharp, which again looks unfamiliar and maybe it looks difficult, but once you start getting in there, you realize, oh, all I have to do is move my thumb like this, piece of cake. And now you've got to go from F sharp to G double sharp to A sharp. So again, isolate it, repeat it a bunch until it looks familiar and feels comfortable. Maybe add one more note. Once you start to see all of these accidentals for what they are, it becomes much more approachable, and you start to see all these patterns, the half steps involved, and it becomes more fun to play. One of the recurring notes that's pretty important in this excerpt is low D, and on all bassoons, low D is notoriously sharp. So to deal with that, first start with your embouchure, try to keep your jaw open, allow everything to settle, and play towards the tip of the reed. The more that you work on that, the more flexibility you'll find in that note, and you can even get to the point where it's going to be way flat. Another good trick to know is that as you play D, you can bring your thumb over here to the B flat key. And by pushing down the B flat key and only that B flat key, the tone will change and the pitch will settle in. You got to be careful that your thumb doesn't accidentally push the C key or the B key, because that will change the pitch. But just by adding only the B flat key over here, you can help to bring that D down. You can hear the difference in tone, but by accommodating it with your embouchure and your air, you can help that note to blend right in. One other little detail that might separate your audition from others is that at the end of the second line, we see an accent. And at the beginning of the third line, we see a forzando. Can you play so that we hear a difference? And what would that difference be? What exactly is the difference between an accent and a sforzando? I think the sforzando is going to be a little bit more, it's going to have a little more pizzazz to it. Also, you notice that after the accent, there's no diminuendo, but after the forzando, there is a diminuendo. Paying attention to little details like this can help your audition stand out to the committee. For both of these pieces, do be sure that you're playing with the slur patterns that are written in there. I've heard a bunch of auditions where people play with great technical facility and they have musical ideas and it's wonderful to listen to, but they're tonguing notes that are supposed to be slurred or they're slurring passages that are supposed to be articulated. So pay close attention to all of the details written on the page. Well, thanks for watching. I hope these tips and suggestions are helpful for you. I hope your audition goes well, and hopefully I'll see you up here at CSU for the All-State Orchestra in February. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. My email address is drjack@colostate.edu. Thanks for watching, and best of luck.
Thanks so much for watching this Colorado All-State Prep video. If you have any questions or concerns, please visit music.colostate.edu for more information, including the opportunity to schedule an individual visit with the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. Good luck on your audition.